please join me in welcoming the Honorable Mayor Cory Booker as he reflects on the future, humble hopes, and insane idealism.
Third time's a charm, really amazing. Love you very much. Wow. This has been a tremendous privilege for me to be here for 3 nights in a row. It's not something I often get to do. And as I've done every night, I want to give a lot of thanks to the folks who are hosting me. And I know a lot of that came from some brilliant individuals who have a vision for a lecture series that can both instruct and inspire, both make people think, as well as be being a provocative force for action. But truly, again, the namesake is Miss Morrison. And this has been the gift to me, not just to be able to share from my spirit, but to engage the community. I've been here now for a few days and have had chances to talk to students and graduate students, to talk to other faculty member, and just really be fortified in my time here as I look now to return tonight for a meeting I have very late in the evening with some of my senior staff, who's wondering where is their mayor. But the privilege really was to get a chance to get to know a hero of mine, somebody who I said as the first night, whose books so touched me. I tried to pull out of her tonight books that touched her. And I concluded that this woman was touched, I'm sure, in small ways by many books, but I see clearly now that she was a woman most importantly touched by God. And the truth of the matter is, this has been a privilege to get to know her, not just as an iconic figure, not just through her literature, but to know her as a human being. And I was leaning next to me, I think Molly, who's sitting there, I leaned over to her and I described her as mischievous in the most delightful sense. And to see her in her candid truth, to see her laid out before me with no shame of who she is powerfully present and very, very much an honest soul, makes me realize that heroes, and truly, heroes are truly people too. And she is just that. I said last night, I joked that I was a little drummer boy, I had no gifts to bring. But that's why I thank God for Dawn McPhee in my life, because she always says, bring some gifts, Cory. So today I can bring only a symbolic gift of flowers. And these flowers do indeed pale in comparison to you. But I hope that in some ways they can be a reflection. They can be a reflection of me. So allow me to. Thank you very much. The job of a mayor, it never stops. And though I have been geographically removed from my city, I confess that I've been dealing with, I used to always call them the crisis of the week. Now I think my life is becoming crisis du jour. And so I was literally blackberrying last night until about 4 o'clock in the morning, barking out orders and dealing with things. So I am tired tonight, which is probably an opportunity for you all, because I have a chance to lose my filters. Usually when I'm tired, I lose my filters and things just come out raw. So not to steal from the great Eddie Murphy, but I'm going to be a little raw tonight. And the hope of mine is that we have a conversation afterwards. We had to break yesterday for Biden and Palin to witness that. But today I would like to languish a little bit before I get dragged back to my meeting up north and maybe have a candid conversation, especially around issues of policy and hard policy, because that is something within my talks that I have not been able to delve into as much as I would like to, and I'm more hoping that that comes out in the end. But I want to talk for a moment about just who I am. And I have a family that has lots of stories and larger-than-life characters. And many of the stories are apocryphal, I know. Like my father, who sits before me, the great individual that he is, who always used to tell me about how he grew up. And the older he got and the older I got, the more the stories just seemed more extreme. I mean, he grew up in North Carolina, but there were blizzards all the time during his stories. and he grew up in geographical anomalies where I don't understand how he had to walk uphill to get to school and then uphill again to go home. So I told you last night that he describes himself as just Po, P-O. We can't afford the other two letters to be poor. So this is my dad, who is one of the more colorful characters that I've ever met in my life, and we have lots of stories. Only a few of them, I suspect, are actually 100% true. Most of them have high levels of truthiness, and some of them, though, I have to question. But the one story I really enjoy is my father sitting in the back of a classroom and a teacher showing up for the first day of school and just saying to the class, this is the first day of school. I want to teach you all about self-esteem. So anybody in this classroom thinks you're stupid, I want you to stand up right now. And my father says, everybody looks around, nobody moves, and the teacher repeats herself. Come on now, class, you think you're dumb, you think you're stupid, stand up. And my father says he just looks around, nobody was moving, so he pushed his chair back and stood up. And the woman stands there looking at my father. They just stand down staring at each other for a second. And then she just says, Mr. Booker, what's wrong with you, boy? You think you're dumb? You think you're stupid? And my father says, he scratches his head and just says, well, shucks, ma'am, I don't think I'm stupid, but I didn't want you to be the only one standing. So if there's anything I have to say, it's this constant theme within my own personal life and the challenge I had from my elders as I grew up to stand for something, to do the difficult thing in life, to try to stand up in as great as consistency as possible for who you are, for what you believe in, to hold your ideals up high and always reach for them. You may never be perfectly in line with those ideals, but to do everything you can to live life consistently. It's integrity. Reach for that. My parents and my grandparents always reminded me of that lesson, usually reminding me more through their deeds than through their words. I had a father, again, to pick on him a little bit, who just talked to me about recognizing the genius, the beauty, and the love of everybody that you meet. And I would see it because going around with my dad would usually have to add about half an hour for even the most mundane tasks. He'd be in a checkout line with a grocery store clerk, and before you know it, that grocery store clerk would be telling my dad all their problems, and counseling my father, and my father would stand there as I'm waiting impatiently holding the bag of tomatoes saying, let's go, Dad. But this was my father, who could see the beauty in everybody he met. Whether you were a prince or you were a pauper, it was a great thing about him. In graduation after graduation, I had one of those crazy families that would always show up and be very loud. And graduations were a celebration. From the time I graduated from the 8th grade all the way to graduating from law school. And I'll never forget my grandfather, who was another one of these larger-than-life characters, this amazing man in my existence, who would always come up to me and say, just like my dad, always the same stories and the same jokes over and over and over again. It would always be, see, son, the tassel is worth the hassle. And he would go on. See, I never went to any fraternities, and he said, okay, if you're not going to be a Omega Psi Phi, you're either going to be a GDI or I felt a thigh, and he would laugh like crazy about these things. So what I got, though, from them always was with the doses of humor, as bad as their humor is, and if my staff is now wondering where I got it, and they now see, that also I got from them a lot of doses of truth as well. Never forget that the degree you hold was paid for by the blood, sweat, and tears of your ancestors. Never forget that something's expected of you. You have obligations in this world. Never forget that you have to go out and do the best you can for yourself with the understanding that you do that so that you can give back for others. These were the lessons over and over and over again. They were moral lessons. They were spiritual lessons. They were teaching me ideals. And so now I stand as a mayor of a city and I deal with extreme practicalities, with the fundamentals. I deal with management and business analytics and all of that. I deal with planning and engineering and criminology, all these very pragmatic and practical things. And I hope that we do get into a deeper conversation about them, and I've tried to touch on them in my other lectures, because those are the things that where the rubber hits the road, you have to have a plan, you have to have objective measures of that plan, you have to be able to push that plan and make it work. We have now a time in cities that I have actually had an emboldening of my faith in American cities and New Jersey cities in particular. There are huge trends that are working in the favor of people who believe in cities. And indeed, I am a believer in cities. Pericles, who's considered one of the first great mayors on the planet, used to always say, cities are where good things come together and manifest the great. They manifest the divine. They manifest the highest exaltations to the universe. And to me, this is what cities, I believe, are about. The cities have always been historically both places of challenge and both places of problems, but also places where music flourishes, where art flourishes, places where people come together and cross those bounds, sometimes uncomfortably, that often divide people, where people hear and see other people who speak different languages, who praise in different ways, and through that cosmopolitan nature, they do exactly that Periclean vision. They begin to break down those barriers. They begin to create a powerful mix, a wonderful, soul-soothing, a wonderful, powerful, amazing way of coming together. And that coming together, to me, is what life is about. It is through that unity that we manifest the greatness of community. And it truly, in cities, you see that every single day. And so my belief is these powerful trends that are environmental. We now know that we can no longer, in the state of New Jersey, continue this crazy sprawl. Our legislature is doing the right thing by trying to preserve green spaces, preserve our highlands. And as our state continues to grow in population, the cities which bled population, like Newark, losing almost half of its population over just a handful of decades. Now people are realizing that if we're going to build, if we're going to develop, the place to do it is back in our cities. Many people now are going to be choosing cities because the realities have changed in terms of the cost of living. People don't want to spend more of their discretionary income driving an hour, 2 hours, commuting to New York, literally from Pennsylvania to work. It makes no sense. It's not rational. People who have a consciousness about saving the environment are not going to think that I'm going to pollute the air driving when I could be right on public transportation. These trends that worked against cities in the past, where people, and during the Eisenhower administration, were thinking, let's build highways out of cities, as opposed to investing in public transportation. Those trends are going to change. And you hear city planners talking about it all over America now, about making larger investments in public transportation and rapid bus transit, making investments in light rail and other things that are making cities more and more accessible. These trends are helping Newark, but even more than that. Newark's going to make sense because of the innate assets that it possesses. Here we have a city that I know is going to grow just because now in the globe, Newark sits perfectly on the best transportation superstructure in the entire East Coast. The busiest port that serves the largest consumer market there is. And so right now, the port that we have in Newark, which is already so huge, is going to double in its size, conservative estimates in the next decade. We already employ over 100,000 people directly in port-related jobs, many more in indirect jobs related to our port. As we grow that port and begin to realize we're going to not only grow thousands of more jobs, but we're going to do it closer to the port. If you look at a map of Newark, you see the ring around our port is vacant and empty, producing only a dozen jobs. And the insane things that happen, and I've had conversations directly with people like Morrison, these global logistics supply chains that realize cities make so much more sense because what they used to do in our city was bring things in, load it onto trucks, drive it out of Newark down to exit 8A or further, unload it into warehouses, split it up, break it up, put it back on trucks, drive it back up into Newark, burning fuel, burning energy, burning money, spewing pollution into our air. And then they put it on our air freight, they put it on our rail lines, they put it on our highways, they put it back on ships. Sitting and having candid conversations with these companies, they say it doesn't make sense to do that anymore. In fact, now, not only does it make sense to do that, but we realize we could save millions and millions of dollars if we just created more warehousing at your port. And those are the greatest kind of jobs. Remember the disappearing of the manufacturing base in the Northeast that took away jobs where working class people can make money, but now we can see thousands of jobs springing up in Newark for people making $15 to $25 an hour or more. It's the new economy where we're going to be creating opportunity. I was just in Silicon Valley talking to one of the great VC firms that said very quietly, one of the most famous ones in Silicon Valley, they're shifting their investments to the green economy. And we had the most dynamic conversations. A former New Jersey guy who's out there as a captain in Silicon Valley telling me that all the VC people are realizing that our economy, whether people like it or not, whether it's politically in vogue or not, in fact, they started years before, is going to become a green economy. And that we're going to realize that we can take advantage of our cities because there's so many reasons why that the cities are going to make sense with smaller carbon footprints. Cities are going to make sense with access to buildings and industry. Cities are going to make sense with access to universities. And we started having a wonderful conversation on how a green economy can create thousands of jobs for Newark residents, could really put us back into a position where Newark is driving innovation and driving change. There's so many trends that are working in our favor. And another trend is simply this. I believe that Americans are going to want to remain competitive. I believe that Americans are going to realize that, as I just talked about environmental issues, they're going to realize that there's a great natural resource that we have that is not limited in geographic space, limited to places where the oil is or where the coal is or where the natural gas is. This natural resource is equally distributed all around our country. And this national resource, everybody will realize, is actually the key natural resource to remain competitive as a nation. And if we don't actually foster this natural resource that's equally distributed in every community, in every neighborhood in America, then we're going to continue to fall behind in a competitiveness in a global knowledge-based economy. And that natural resource, obviously, is our people, is our children. And I do believe that things are starting to narrow, this left-right divide where we seem to, as a nation, especially in our national conversation, get caught in a tug-of-war of moving one way to the left or one way to the right when we don't realize that we're stopping and inhibiting our ability to move forward. What I'm seeing, the national trends going on, and the mere fact that my allies now are what is remarkable for a young African-American Democrat. That in City Hall right now, I have organizations like the Manhattan Institute, I have right-wing Republicans. One of my greatest supporters and generous benefactors to things we're fighting for in Newark is a guy who wrote 2 books on neoconservative thought. Because when it comes to some of the most obvious policy prescriptions in America to transform our cities and make things better, they're not left-right issues. They're issues of common sense for Americans. I talked at length about education in one of the conversations I had with students today. And if you looked at the National Democratic Convention, you saw a whole bunch of Democrats, something I didn't think would happen, coming out before the convention, the day before, sitting there talking about education policy in a way that you wouldn't hear before, in ways that Republicans and Democrats, everybody from Al Sharpton to people on the right, standing up and saying the same thing about the transformations and what's necessary to change American education, not based on philosophy, but based on patterns of what is already working in some of the most difficult neighborhoods in America. Educational excellence is being seen. And that the question no longer is how to create islands of excellence. It's how to take those already existing examples, as Professor Glaude said, and create them from islands of excellence to hemispheres of hope or global greatness. There are so many powerful trends that are working, that are unifying individuals on all political spectrums to focus on real problem solving. It's amazing to me that the national debate gets caught up in gun laws and violence, and there's some people that say let's ban all the weapons, and some people that say we got to have our guns, and it's a seductive debate that we all want to yell about, but very quietly around America, mayors on the right and the left have all joined together, independents, Republicans, Democrats, and formed an organization that said mayors against illegal guns. Here you had a Heller decision where every single friend that I can think of that's really out there on issues seemed to get upset by that decision. I couldn't find that many people who weren't upset except for Newark school kids when I talked to them about it and said, what did you think about this decision? And I explained it to them in City Hall one day, a large room in City Hall, and most of them didn't seem too upset. And when I started talking to my police director, I said, this Heller decision that seems to be making so many people on my side of the aisle upset, tell me how many people who have bought handguns legally have actually been involved in shootings in Newark. And the number he gave back to me was 0. And what Mayors Against Illegal Guns are saying, there's so many laws in America that if we just focused on, that we all agree about sensibly as Americans, we can make transformative change. Here we are in the United States of America, and we have this no-fly list where some certain people, Eddie, I think you might be on the list, can't fly on airplanes because they're suspected of terrorism. He is a really subversive individual, if you know him well. Those same people who we won't allow on airplanes, we can have those same people go into gun shops and buy a trunk full of guns. Crazy, crazy things like that. When you poll gun owners in America, they say that that's 80, 90% will say that's wrong. We have laws in America that say that you could shut down a gun retailer. And by the way, the majority of guns, or the plurality of guns that are sold in the majority, of guns that are sold in and used in weapons, used in violent crime in Newark, in Pennsylvania, in New York, in New Haven, come from about 1% of the gun owners in the South. And you have these gun owners that often get shut down for selling to people without doing background checks, who are just gun runners and run them up an iron pipeline in 95 where they stop on every city along the way. They can get shut down for that, for selling without doing background checks, and then they can take their entire inventories, and sell it to whomever they want without doing a background check. It's these remarkable things that we have, laws that are loopholes that you can drive a truck through, that again, if you poll people on the right, on the left, Americans, you realize that we all agree. So I have a lot more confidence in cities than I think even the generation before me did. I look around Newark and I see just so much opportunity, so much competitive advantage, so much that we can do constructively and pragmatically to transform our cities. But this is the rub. And this is why I've spent so much time talking about the themes that I've talked about here so far in Princeton. The challenge to me when people say, what is the most hardest thing or most important thing, Mayor, that you have to do as mayor? What is it? And immediately people think I'm going to talk about the problems with poverty or gang violence. They think I'm going to go to something like I just described about. But what I always start to go to is I say the biggest challenge to us as Americans, the biggest challenge to us as a nation, is our ability to stand up in a spiritual way and manifest those values that we believe, to live consistently with who we claim to be as a country, to show that we have the hope and the idealism and the love, not with our words, not how we pledge allegiance to the flag, not how we sing our national anthem, not with the flag pins that we wear, but actually in the things we choose to do, how we choose to exercise our idealism. And so for me, this is more than anything what I spend my time doing in Newark. I mentioned yesterday all these phenomenal Newarkers, heroes, some of the greatest Americans I have ever met, who get it, who challenge me, who've lifted me up when I've fallen down as mayor, and who sustain me or my provocateurs as I move forward in my job. These are the folks that I want to be in the most wonderfully organic way, those that spread the idealism that not only has sustained Newark, but can transform it, and not only our city, but can do that to the nation. And so I always come back to that. I talked about humble hopes, and I have to tell you, I started my consciousness as a young man. You know, you leave your parents, and as my parents say, they just worry. Oh, dear God, I hope all the things we did for his first 18 years are going to be okay. And they're still worrying. My parents always say now that behind every successful child is an astonished parent. And so, my parents are still astonished. My mom has not exhaled yet. She's still waiting for something might break. I might show somehow that I'm the same boy that I was when I was 6 years old. But one of the first things I did at Stanford that was a blessing to me was a little bit of a gift. And the gift was that as great as I think I was in college football, and as much as I exaggerate my wonderful exploits on the football field, the older I get, the better I was. I actually rode the bench for my first year, and 2 years, in fact, at Stanford. And it was a time that I had taken so much of my identity from athletics that I began to get very focused on those other elements of me, the seeds that my parents planted, the words that they said over and over again, the stories and the jokes, that I really started getting into service. And having that be not just a seed, but have it flower in my life and really become how I define myself, not as a jock, but as an agent for change, as an agent to make a contribution, to make a humble offering to my ancestors who did so much for me. And I remember just sitting there and getting involved in East Palo Alto, working and discovering the beauty and the glory that existed in an inner city area that people just talked so negatively about. Meeting some incredible individuals at an after-school program and seeing what they were doing to empower these young boys in particular. I started working on a crisis hotline that ran 24 hours. And sitting there listening to people, and your job as a counselor and a peer counselor wasn't to solve people's problems. It was really just to be one who sat there and facilitated one coming to their own conclusions and dealing with their own problems. And I would listen to what were innately spiritual struggles. It was an awakening to me because I heard about issues that I never really knew about, from people struggling with the challenges of depression, people struggling with eating disorders, people struggling with things that were really large, like not knowing how they were going to pay their bills or fulfill their obligations to their family, to even just students that were stressed about the next final they had and the expectations they had for themselves and that their parents had for themselves. To me, it was the beginning of my opening up of my understanding of how common we are, how much we as people have in common, how much we as people all have the same worries and fears, but more importantly, the same hopes and dreams. I say humble hopes for today's lecture because what really do we as Americans want? We want to know that when we send our children to school for 8 years, they're going to get 8 years worth of education or more, and not 3 or 4 years of education. That their reading levels will reflect the numbers of years in which they went to school. We want to know that when we send our children to schools, that we're sending them to institutions that are not just schools, but cathedrals of learning, where they can explore ideas and learn to metabolize them and make them work for them, where they can learn to critically think and apply and mastery of skills to whatever they choose to do. We want our schools to be doorways to their imagination and their dreams, to prepare them for a 21st century economy. We also want to know that we as Americans can go to work and not just survive on what we have, but thrive, that have jobs that are dignified, that jobs that give us meaning, jobs that have purpose, jobs where we can make a contribution. That we as Americans want to know that if we work 40 hours a week, we can actually live on that and not be like the state of New Jersey where you need to make twice the minimum wage just to support a family of 3. It's basic financial securities. We want to know that we can afford housing as Americans. And that if we have housing, it's not going to be like many people in cities struggle with, that has high lead paint levels that you don't even know, but your children are getting elevated blood levels. Maybe not even lead poisoning, but elevated lead levels have direct correlations to learning disabilities. We want to know that issues, that the air they breathe is going to be clean, that their kids are not going to have epidemic asthma rates like so many children have in cities. We want to have housing that's good. We want to have housing that's solid. We don't have to fear being homeless. Humble hopes that Americans have. We want to know as Americans that if we get sick, we're not going to have to declare bankruptcy. That we as Americans have a safety net. If we have a catastrophic disease or some injury, that our entire life savings, the savings of our cousins and our brothers and our families won't be drained because something happened to us unexpectedly. We want to have that safety net. We want to know that actually we have the opportunity to be proactive in our health and that we can stop diseases before they happen. Humble hopes. We also want to know that, yes, we admit that there might be a time where we as a nation have to fight, where we have to go to war, but we want to know as Americans that if we go to war, it's for noble reasons. It's in pursuit of our highest ideals. It's a reflection of who we say we are as a people, and that we won't expend blood and treasure for some mistaken reason in the pursuit of simple power or domination over other individuals. These are humble hopes that we as Americans have. You sit on lines in crisis and see people in their darkest moments, and you often see actually the strength of the human spirit. You see that they're not too much different than you. In many ways, they inspire you. This, to me, is what our nation is about. But there's something even a little bit more. I think all Americans want to have an opportunity to give something back, to raise their children in a way that they can be better off, that they can continue these ideals. They want to have a chance in their communities. I don't believe our country is selfish, that they can give to their neighbor and be there for other people in their community. To me, this sounds humble, but to me, it is actually pretty revolutionary. A wonderful book I know, In Search of My Mother's Garden, is Alice Walker, and I love this phrase she has when she talks about artistry and revolution. She says, the real revolution is always concerned with the least glamorous stuff, with raising a reading level from 2nd grade to 3rd, with simplifying history and writing it down or reciting it for the old folks, with helping illiterates fill out food stamps forms, for they must eat revolution or not. The dull, frustrating work with our people is the work of the black revolutionary artist. It means most of all staying close enough to them to be there whenever they need you. This, to me, is what my country stands for. What I believe is so urgently needed right now is people who have this ability to see the small things, the power in momentary exchanges, how wonderful it is to make a small contribution to somebody else's life. We do often talk, and I say it all the time, that we want to change the world, but actually, not only do we want to do that, but we want to do it in the most humble of ways. So to me, this is the spirit of our country. I tried to talk about this the first night as best I could. I tried to help anybody who wanted to listen to me to recognize that we come from a history, often obscured, of individuals in the most difficult of circumstances who never lost those humble hopes and dreams for their country. And we're willing to do, as I said, ordinary people willing to do extraordinary things to make real on the promise of America. This is what I believe is needed for cities and for our nation to transform, and it's also what I believe is a secret to our success in the future. To continue this tradition. I'll never forget about a story I heard from Elie Wiesel where he says that he was asked during the Holocaust to leave his bed, and his rabbi, his father had died, and his rabbi who was looking after him asked him to come and witness a Beit Din. A Beit Din is like a Jewish tribunal. It's 3 rabbis that will sit in judgment over an issue or a controversy. And the Beit Din he had to witness was these 3 rabbis putting God on trial. And they argued all night about God. Was he justified in allowing the tragedies of the Holocaust to exist? And Wiesel tells a story that these men argued with each other and brought out history and pogroms and the most unimaginable history. They brought about what were the Jewish people doing before the Holocaust. And back and forth they went. And he said, just about this time when the sun's going to come up, they took a vote and it was unanimous. They found God guilty. And then what Wiesel said was powerful was that the men pulled out their tefillin, which are these leather straps where you literally bound the word of God to your heart and to your head. And they supplicated themselves before this deity that they just convicted in their Beit Din. And what Wiesel said, as this testifies to, is one of the highest ideals of humankind. And he said it in a word, gevaita. He translated that word as meaning continue. I take that story and say that this is a profound story of hope, of seeing the worst possible imaginable examples of human depravity, and within the midst of all that, still work to continue your idealism and your spirit, no matter what the circumstances. This is a story not from our American story, but it's a story to me that is evidence of what is so urgently necessary. For people to see the world unapologetically as it is, but still within that, have a vision for what we must be, what we can be, what we should be. That is the power, to me, of hope. I repeated it again and again last night about hope. I had an argument at the dinner table, as I mentioned, with Professor West and Eddie Glaude, and it's difficult arguing with 2 people who are so much smarter than you. I decided to try to change the terms of debate because it's the only way I could win. Talk about something I know, like how to break a 2-deep zone against USC. An optimist is a person who sees only the lights in a picture, whereas a pessimist sees only the shadows. An idealist, however, is the one who sees the light and the shadows, but in addition sees something else. The possibility of changing the picture, of making the lights prevail over the shadows. That's what we need. That's the idealism that I believe is inherent in America. That's what Eddie and Cornell were trying to say to me the other night, right? Yes. This, to me, is the beginning, is where we can come together under this understanding, where we don't ignore or obscure the suffering of others, where we have the courage actually to accept their suffering as part of us. To see individuals as not different than us just because they pray or look different, but to be able to look to somebody and see their worth, see their value, see that they have something to offer you. This is why people that say we should tolerate each other are wrong. Tolerating just says you're going to stomach somebody's right to be different. If they disappeared off the face of the earth, we're no better or no worse for their disappearance. But if you move beyond tolerance to love, that means that you recognize the worth and the value. And in a nation that says these three powerful utterances, that e pluribus unum, that we are the many, from the many, the one, that means that all of us are important. All of us are crucial. So to me, this is what we are trying to achieve in Newark, a recognition of the value of that resource I mentioned before, the value of each and every one of us as individuals. Now, this is indeed a difficult thing to manifest. This is indeed a very thorny, rough road to travel. King said, if you lose hope, somehow you lose the vitality that keeps life moving. You lose the courage to be, that quality that helps you go on in spite of it all. And so today I have a dream. But the problem is, so many people have stopped dreaming. They've stopped seeing things that are not there. I talked about Miss Jones, who sat in one of those seats in the front, about her first challenge to me and saying to me, boy, you could never help me after I described what was going around me. She said, you need to understand that the world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. I was one of those people who only saw problems when I described the world. What I often say is that it reflected something that Emerson says, and if I can paraphrase Emerson, he said, that only which we have within can we see without. If we see no angels, it's because we harbor none. So one of my favorite professors at Stanford was a man named Jim March. And I signed up for his class about Don Quixote. And what a mistake I made to sign up to a class that had to read Don Quixote and a whole bunch of other big books during football season. And I suffered through that quarter at Stanford. Trying to read War and Peace was one of the books on the reading list. But his seminal book was Don Quixote. He came back years later, after I graduated as a city councilman, and asked me to do a video for him about leaders he thought that exhibited what he taught in that class. You see, he thought Don Quixote was the best example of management in our country. And that intrigued me as a young man. And I'm like, why did I have to read the whole darn book for you to understand this one point? And his point really is that here was this man that chased windmills, who saw things that weren't there. He was a profound idealist, made these incredible speeches. Don Quixote. And he said, that's the power of great leaders in business. It was a business school class, and he said, they're not the people that see the truth as it exists, but they see the larger spiritual truth, the larger idealistic truth of the world. And instead of adapting to the world that is, they try to get everyone around them, poor Sancho Panza, everybody around them to adapt to the world that they see. He called it insanity. He said that we need to have more insane leaders. And then years later, he found me to interview about insanity. I thought of it as a compliment. A quote from Don Quixote, sanity may be madness, but the maddest of all is to see life as it is and not as it should be. So, I believe in insane idealism and constantly seeing that which isn't there. My parents did that. Look at this boy. If they just saw me as I was, that's all I ever would have amounted to be. But they saw me as I could be and as I should be, and I tried my entire life to live up to their image of me. That's the power of sight, the power of vision. I'll never forget that Bob Beeman, and when he smashed the long jump record, somebody asked him beforehand, how did he do it? And he said, I saw myself flying. People who are great mountain climbers, I saw an interview of one of the first people to get to the top of Mount Everest, and they said, as snowy as it was, as difficult it was, I never lost sight of the summit, even when my vision was obscured. Harriet Tubman, as I said, whose statues sit on my desk in the darkest of night, where she could not even see where she was going, said she always saw freedom. This is the power that I think is going to ultimately ensure, with good policy, with good leadership, with great community, working in concert, that's going to get us to where we need to be. I just want to get to the questions that you might have, but I want to just end this with a very personal note. I had these larger-than-life figures in my family, and they were blessings to me, and I was doing what I thought should be done, trying to do the impossible. I refused to accept what was going on in the city of Newark as a councilman, especially when I saw what it looked like from the inside of City Hall. And I took on an impossible dream. I took a poll in in the year 2000, and my pollster came back to me and said, "You can't win this election." And I said to them, "I'm sorry, we're gonna win this election." And my whole team, we argued when we saw these polling numbers that said how hard it would be to beat the incumbent mayor at that point. And we still insisted on doing it. And we put together a campaign, and we gave it our best shot, and we lost. But in the midst of that election, when I was trying to dare the impossible deed, I was driving along in my car on Spruce Street, right around Prince Street in Newark. And I got a call from a family member who told me something that I had to pull the car over. And he told me that my grandfather died. And I'll never forget this moment, and I just sat there on the side of the road and wept like a little boy. You see, I told you about my grandfather, this man that was such an amazing man. He used to pack us all into a mobile home, and again, the way he spoke about everything, it wasn't just a beat-up Winnebago. It was the green dream. And when we got into the Winnebago, he would spew history, talk about the country in the boldest, greatest ways as we traveled around the nation and saw this land of ours. And I'm telling you, if he didn't know something, he made up a great story about it. We're driving through Yuma, Arizona, and I'm like, "Granddad, why do they call it Yuma, Arizona?" Well, I'll tell you, son. Two men had a gunfight way back before the founding of the town. One man shot the other man. He grabbed his heart and said, "Yuma!" and he died. This was my life. We didn't need TV in my family. My grandfather took on cancer. Tough man. He had these big leathery hands that even when I grew up to be the 6'3", 250 football player, his hands still seemed so meaty and big when I held them. And he took on cancer and beat back prostate cancer once, I think twice. But one of the last times I saw him, the prostate cancer was getting the better of him, metastasized throughout his body. It was difficult to me, and I tell you, I feel a little wrong saying this, but it was even difficult for me to look at him in those final days when I went on my last trip to see him. He lived in Vegas, by the way. He used to tell me, "Boy, I always bet on black." He's lying in his bed, and he wasn't making sense. I think he was just delirious. And he said something to me, the final words, that didn't make sense at the time. And forgive me if I'm trying to project things into his final words that give me meaning now. But I said goodbye to him, and not knowing that it would be my last time. And he said to me, "I love you." He said, "I love you." He said, "I love your children." He said, "I love your children's children." And now you have to understand, I'm single. I got no kids, Mom. And I won't even say that I know about, because of course, Mom, I'm a virgin. I don't believe in sex before marriage. And it was confusing to me, it was really confusing to me that he said those things to me. And again, I chalked it up to him being delirious. But now I'm on the side of the road. I'm about a month away, or less than 2 months away from the biggest election of my life, at least I thought at that time, and was feeling great. The polls were narrowing, and I started feeling strong, this sense that that we could do this, we could transform this city, that we were going to win the impossible election, and the next it would be me marching into office with a phalanx of individuals who loved Newark and were committed to change. We're going to create a government that was a better reflection of the people, that was transparent, that was accountable, that had integrity. We were going to focus on our priorities. We were going to motivate ourselves and the community, and people who were stubborn and didn't want to listen. We would love them so much that they would relent and join us. And now I'm there crying, and I'm missing him already, and I'm searching in my heart for some meaning. And in his final words, I found something to grab onto. So my grandfather was larger than life, and I now assume that this man really did stand for something, that he loved me so much and was so large in that love that he loved my children that were not even born yet, that he loved my grandchildren that were not even born yet, that he evidenced a love in his life and the way he lived, not with his words, but he loved so much. He stood up for love so much that he loved individuals who will never know his name. His love will reverberate for generations. And this, to me, is what life is about. Will you have the courage to stand up and love in that way? Love with courage and honesty, love with hope and idealism. Will you love like that crazy white person who was taking slaves and teaching them to read, even though they could have been jailed and chained and whipped for it? Will you stand up and love that much? Will you love so much that you're willing to break free of your chains and not just escape for your own freedom, but come back and get more folk? You may not know their names, you may not know who they are, but you just believe that you can never be free until everyone is free. Will you love that much? Will you stand up and love so much that even though you are sitting in a sweatshop, working hours that are unconscionable to anyone who lives today, that you will still have the courage to begin to organize unions, knowing that you could lose your job and your livelihood and be homeless and have your children starve? Will you love that much? Will you love that much that when your country calls you, not for some ignoble war, but for a real cause, will you stand up and love so much to be like one of those young 18-year-old men that hits a beach called Normandy, knowing that you and your colleagues are going to face bullets and bombs, but you still go forward? Will you love that much? Will you love so much that you could be comfortable in your northern community, but you know that injustice is happening in America, and injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere? So you get on a bus called the Freedom Ride, and you travel down south knowing that you're going to get chain whipped and beat and dragged out, and you might disappear in some Mississippi swamp, but you still love, you still stand up, and you still believe. Will you love that much to get up every single day and go teach in a classroom where the children are coming to school with not enough clothes on their back, with not enough food in their belly, where you get no support and no pay, but you teach anyway? Will you love that much? This is what it means to be an idealist. This is what it means to be an American. This is what it means to live a life of hope. Will you stand up and love? Thank you.